Good evening. I am happy to invite you to the first event of the spring quarter of the Institute of Politics. Many of you may have attended some of the events in the first quarter. We had a wonderful kickoff, and I can't think of a better way to continue the momentum than with the panel we have here tonight. I lived as a political consultant with a rule that got me through years of ups and downs, which is that you're never as smart as you look when you win, and you're never as dumb as you look when you lose. That said, the Democratic Party won in 2012, and the Republican Party lost, and this has created a period of reflection within the Republican Party about where to go from here and deal with the challenges that they face. And we have, as our introducer will tell you in greater detail in a moment, about as good a panel as you can have to explore these issues with Chris Wallace, about as good a moderator as you could have to lead that discussion. I just want to make a few announcements about what's coming up in the next few days. On Tuesday, tomorrow at 4:30, former Congressman Steve LaTourette, one of our IOP Spring Fellows, will continue his seminar discussion on the politics of debt and the deficit of trust in Washington. At 6 p.m. right here at iHouse, we'll be holding a panel discussion entitled Race in Chicago Politics, 30 years after the election of Harold Washington, whose birthday comes up on April 15th. And I'll participate in that panel. We have a great panel for that, led by Laura Washington, who will moderate. On Wednesday, former White House Cabinet Secretary and Spring IOP Fellow Chris Liu will conduct the first of his seminars on the limits of presidential power in the U.S. And Wednesday night, the Lieutenant Governor of Illinois, Sheila Simon, will be meeting at the IOP House for our first Poultry and Politics session, featuring not only Sheila Simon, but Harold's Chicken. So I already suspect that may be one of our most popular events. And at 9 p.m., our Student Advisory Council is hosting the first West Wing Wednesday. Apparently, West Wing, which I thought was kind of archaic, has made a rebirth as a result of Netflix. And so a lot of our students have discovered West Wing. And during the course of this quarter, not only will we screen episodes of West Wing, but we hope to bring some of the writers and performers who are involved in West Wing here to talk about that show. On Thursday, Bethany Mclean, who's the financial editor of Vanity Fair and an author of The Smartest Guys in the Room and All the Devils Are Here, 2 books about the financial industry, financial crisis, will be at the IOP House to continue her seminar entitled Covering the Calamity, the Financial Crisis, and How We Faced It. And on next Tuesday and Wednesday, the 16th and 17th, Gary Hart, former Senator Gary Hart, will be here in his first and second seminars on the changing nature of security in a new century. And then finally, next Thursday on the 18th, there'll be a lunch seminar with Matt Bai of the New York Times, who will focus on modern political journalism. So with that, let me introduce an incoming member of our Student Advisory Council, Eric Wesson. He is a third-year political science major. He's quickly become part of the IOP as a writing associate on our 2012 full access book reviewing the race based on the sessions we had in the last quarter. What's missing here is your association with the campus Republicans. That's, but there you go. But what is here is that he was the leader of the first student-run Lotke-Hamantaschen debate here at the university. So a man of many, many talents, Eric Wesson.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for coming to tonight's panel, What's Next for the Republican Party? We have here tonight a truly amazing panel with extremely wide-ranging politicos from people involved both in politics in general and the Republican Party. Now, Mr. Barbour told me that brevity is next to godliness, so let me get to introducing the panel itself. Governor Haley Barbour has been involved in Republican politics since volunteering on the original Nixon campaign in 1968. After that, he quickly rose in the ranks, and in 1993 became chairman of the RNC. During his tenure, Republicans took both the House and the Senate for the first time in 40 years. Following his work with the RNC, Barbour became governor of Mississippi. In June of 2009, he was actually elected chairman of the Republican Governors Association. Barbour was also one of the founders of the lobbying firm, the BGR Group, one of the most powerful lobbying organizations in DC. Next on our panel is Bill Kristol, the founder and editor-in-chief of the Weekly Standard. After teaching political philosophy and American politics at the University of Pennsylvania and the Kennedy School of Government, he was chief of staff to Secretary of Education Bill Bennett during the Reagan administration. Following his vocal opposition to the Clinton health plan, Mr. Kristol founded the Weekly Standard, a weekly conservative magazine where he currently works. Mr. Kristol has worked hard to further conservative ideals and disseminate them into the mainstream. Following Mr. Kristol is Mike Murphy. Mike Murphy is a political consultant, currently a partner at Revolution Agency. As a political consultant, he has worked with such high-profile Republican candidates such as John McCain, Mitt Romney, Jeb Bush, and Arnold Schwarzenegger. Mr. Murphy also writes an excellent column for Time magazine. Finally, and most importantly, the National Journal has noted that Mr. Murphy is one of the top 10 Republicans to follow on Twitter. Next up is Beth Myers, who is currently a partner of the Shawmut Group, a Republican polling consulting firm. Previous to this, Ms. Myers worked as a senior advisor to presidential candidate Mitt Romney in both 2008 and 2012. In 2012, she was integral to the vice presidential selection process. She's considered by many to be Governor Romney's most trusted advisor, and she served as a fellow here last quarter, where many of you may have seen her speak. Next on our wonderful panel, we have a senior editor at one of my favorite publications, National Review, Ramesh Ponnuru. He is also a contributor to Bloomberg View and is a fellow at AEI. He's written for a plethora of magazines ranging from the New York Times to the Wall Street Journal. Mr. Ponnuru had a late start to politics, not even entering college until he was 15 years old, but since then he has a prolific career. He's written a widely acclaimed book, The Party of Death, The Democrats, the Media, the Courts, and the Disregard for Human Life. Last but definitely not least will be the moderator of this panel, Chris Wallace. Mr. Wallace is the host of Fox News Sunday, which is conveniently at 9 a.m. Central Time. If you missed yesterday's show with Dan Pfeiffer and Asa Hutchinson, you should really be berating yourself. Mr. Wallace was previously a moderator of Meet the Press, giving him the distinction as serving as the only person to moderate 2 Sunday morning news television shows. Additionally, Mr. Wallace has a lot of experience managing such high-profile figures, and will show you tonight how to moderate an excellent panel. Now, ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for the inaugural Spring Quarter panel at the Institute of Politics, What's Next for the Republican Party?
Good afternoon. Thank you all for coming. I'm going to tell one quick David Axelrod story before we begin. On Fox News Sunday, before we do the show, because one of the big problems, and I've just been giving these guys a pep talk about it, is that you want people to give short answers so you can get more stuff. So one of the things I say to everybody I have on is, and yes, I do say it to David, is, look, short answers, I think I say succinct answers, so we can cover more territory. So the last time we did the show, I'm about to do it, and he says, now, Chris, I just have one thing to say to you. Short questions so we can cover more territory. All right. So we have a distinguished group here. You've heard about all of them, and I want to start and ask you each a minute to 2 minutes each, and I gather this is something that you guys do here. How did you get where you are now, and particularly, because an old guy like Haley Barbour, it's going to take forever to get how you got to here, the first 1 or 2 steps out of college. So, give these guys some pointers.
My family were Democrats in Mississippi. My daddy died when I was 2 years old, but he had been a Democratic elected official. His father was a Democratic elected official. But my oldest brother came home from the Army in 1965, a Goldwater Republican. And I went off to college, didn't think much about it. And then in '68, he ran for mayor of our hometown, Yazoo City, Mississippi, as a Republican. Except, David, in 1968, the Republicans didn't have a line on the ballot. So he had to run as an independent to get his name on the ballot. And I helped in the campaign. And when it was over, the state party asked if I would take the fall off of my senior year in college and run 30 counties in the state in the presidential campaign for the Nixon campaign. So that's how I got started in politics. It was just as accidental as it could possibly be, but just one thing led to another, and then, of course, over time, I ran 7 states for the Ford campaign. I was very involved in 80, ran for senator myself in 82, White House political director, RNC chairman, and then governor of Mississippi for 8 years. So it can happen to you. When you get bit, it sticks sometimes.
Bill?
I grew up in the Yazoo City of the North, the Upper West Side of Manhattan, where there were also no Republicans. It was similar. Bella Abzug was my congresswoman, and that made me a conservative. And then I went to Harvard and worked actually as a student, just as a volunteer. I was still a kind of conservative Cold War Democrat, or moderate Cold War Democrat, for Scoop Jackson, who was the senator from Washington, really a fine man, I think, and a sort of old-fashioned Kennedy-Humphrey Cold War liberal. And I gave out leaflets and worked hard for Scoop. And it was the beginning of my very successisful electoral career. Scoop ran 7th in the Massachusetts primary, behind Wilbur Mills, actually. Then I was in grad school. I was doing political philosophy, ignoring West politics, and Pat Moynihan, who was a friend of my parents and whom I knew some, I had been a teaching assistant for him in one course at Harvard, ran for the Senate after being U.S. ambassador to the UN in '76, and I took the summer off from grad school and went down and worked on the Moynihan primary campaign against Bella Abzug, actually, which Pat won by 1%. That's why he became, but otherwise, Bella Abzug would have been the senator from New York, I suppose, not Moynihan. It was the last Democratic race I ever ran in. That cured me of Democratic politics. And but then I was a professor, and then in '85, Bill Bennett, whom I knew slightly, was nominated to be Secretary of Education by President Reagan. And he asked me to come to Washington for a year just to kind of help write speeches and be his assistant. And one thing led to another, and I've been in Washington for 27 years.
Beth?
Well, again, just like Haley, mine was quite accidental. I was working my way through college in Boston, another place without a lot of Republicans. And I was waiting tables, and one time got to talking with somebody at the bar and mentioned that I was actually a Republican. The next thing I knew, I was being interviewed, this is at the bar, to work for John Connally for president. And they offered to pay me $300 a week, which seemed absolutely amazing. And so I took that job. John Connally didn't do very well in the Massachusetts primary, but the Reagan campaign scooped me up and sent me to the most logical place on the planet for somebody who had never been south or west of Ohio, which was Austin, Texas. And so I got off the plane and went to the Reagan-Bush headquarters, which was in a funeral home, and met my boss, Karl Rove, and got very involved after that and went to work for a polling firm called Market Opinion Research, and then campaign after campaign after campaign. I did try to go cold turkey and went to law school and worked in a law firm for a while, but it didn't stick.
Ramesh?
Well, unlike everybody to my left here, I grew up in Kansas City surrounded by Republicans, which is probably why I wasn't one. But then I went to Princeton and moved right. I had worked. I ended up running the conservative newspaper on campus, which, in the tradition of these things, is now defunct. I worked at National Review one summer. And when I was getting out of college, the Republicans had just taken the Congress for the first time in 40 years, so National Review is expanding its Washington bureau, and in a fit of bad judgment, they asked me to come join that expansion. I had applied, and actually I got into University of Chicago Law School, but I wasn't particularly eager to go to law school. So I deferred for 2 years while I covered the 1996 campaign, and then used the threat of going to law school to extract a raise from National Review. So that's the one bit of advice I can, one example here. Use that one. And I've been at National Review ever since.
Yeah, I just want to say that Ramesh and I had never met, and we came out on the same flight from Washington this afternoon. and we were driving through the teeth of rush hour to get here. It took us a long time, and so I thought, well, how are we going to pass the time? So I said, so Ramesh, tell me about your career and how you got here. I mean, you know, where'd you go to school, your career? And he says, well, I went to Princeton, then I went to the National Review, and I'm still at the National Review. We hadn't even gotten out of, airport exit at O'Hare. It was very distressing.
He said he wanted
with
short
another
answers.
question. Mike.
It was 1981. It was about 8 in the morning. I had barely one eye open as a somewhat hungover college student at the Georgetown School of Foreign Service. And I was looking up at a man named former Soviet Air Force Colonel Peter Pirogov, who had traded in his MiG for a lot of vodka and a job at Georgetown as a Russian language instructor, screaming at me in Russian. And it dawned on me there might be something else I want to do. I think maybe the president can handle the Cold War on his own. I'd always been interested in film and theater, and not long after that, there was a congressman running for re-election that nobody thought could win. The campaign platform was, hey, let's build the Shoreham nuclear power plant in our district. And no consultant would take him. It was the old machine days in Long Island. They had picked him because they needed an Irish Catholic guy who hadn't been to jail. So he got elected in 80, the old boss there. And so I ran a bunch. I knew how to make radio commercials. Nobody else would work for this guy. We had the innovative idea of attacking the opponent for being more for Shoreham than us. One thing led to another. He won. I'm now a political consultant. I got to call my former Teamster night school labor lawyer father back in Detroit and tell him the good news that I was going to leave college to join the Republican Party. And that was about 30 statewide campaigns ago, and I'm still doing some of that.
The title of tonight's event is What is Next for the Republican Party? But as I was thinking about it, I thought before we try to find the cure, let's diagnose the patient. And Haley, you were helped lead, in fact, the RNC's so-called autopsy. I thought it was an interesting choice of word, autopsy of the GOP after the November
I actually said it was a proctoscope exam, but somebody clean that up.
Is the GOP on its deathbed?
No. But first of all, I am older than all of these people, but the first time I ever saw a political poll in Mississippi, 6% of Mississippians considered themselves Republicans. I was executive director of the state party in the 1970s during Watergate, when the national chairman of the Republican Party appointed a committee to decide whether we ought to change the name of the party. That the party was so unpopular, we had about 13% of Americans told pollsters that they considered themselves Republicans. So I have actually been there when we were looking down in the grave. And this isn't what it looks like. We had a presidential election last year that we could have won. We didn't, but we could have won. The president got 51% of the vote. He's the first president in history, I believe, who got a smaller percentage of the vote for his second term than for his first. We could have won. If you were a party on its deathbed, you wouldn't have been in a position to win a presidential election because, A, the incumbent president's always the favorite. This president had the huge advantage of no primary opposition, which means he not only didn't get scarred up in his in his nomination contest, but he also had a boatload of money to spend to try to disqualify his Republican opponent in the spring and summer during the interregnum, when Obama had enough money to burn a wet mule, as they say where I come from. That's a pretty good stack of money. Finally, where the president had no nomination contest, our nomination contest was not very helpful. Was not very helpful to our ultimate nominee. Yet, we had a chance to win that election. Have we got some things that we've got to learn to do a lot better? Yes, sir. Are there demographic changes that in this election were very adverse to us for more than one reason? That's absolutely true. But I'm kind of the school of we're not in as bad a shape as some people seem to think, though we're probably in worse shape than some others would like to think. However, I've seen it a whole lot worse, and of course that comes colored by the fact that there are 30 Republican governors, and I'm a former governor. But when you got 30 Republican governors, the majority in the House of Representatives, and you control a majority of the state legislative chambers, don't get out the coffin cover yet.
We're going to get to the governors later because I think it's an important point, but I want to get to the issue, keep on this issue of the problem with the party. Mike, the GOP has lost the popular vote in 5 of the last 6 presidential elections, including 2000. You seemed a sure bet that you were going to take control of the Senate in 2012, and you didn't. In fact, you lost seats. What's the problem with the party?
Well, I agree with Haley, which is we're not dead, but we're experimenting with death a little bit. Hopefully, like a hanging in the morning, it'll clarify some of our thinking. I'm very fond of that statistic Chris you cited because we're the market party. Well, the market, 4 out of 5 times in popular vote has said no. That's 20 years of losing. I actually looked it up because I wanted to find another organization with similar problems, and I found one. There's an organization that actually had 24 years of losing. The Washington Generals, who play the Harlem Globetrotters, who were professionally paid to lose. So we are at the cusp of changing our status from amateur to professional, and those of us who care about the party are going to try to stop it. What's the problem? Our short-term incentives for party success are not aligned with how you win general elections. The country is changing, and the most dynamic parts of the change demographically, Latino voters, Asian American voters, and young voters are aligned against us. And a lot of our incentives, though we're trying to do something now, and I salute the senators, Marco Rubio, John McCain, and the others, on immigration, is a huge political problem because it's a simple arithmetic business. I am happy with the proctology exam. I think a good job was done, but we are making a foolish mistake if we think the problem is simply mechanics. What counts is message and policy, and we have to modernize the conservatism that works. When you lose voters, young voters, by 23 points, when you lose unmarried voters by 29 points, you have a fundamental problem in your coalition. And people say, well, we just need better internet computers. Well, it's bigger than that. The Democrats dominate the internet because they dominate younger voters who are more connected to Web.2. We dominate AM radio. Average age, almost dead. So we're going to have the technology reform, and I have a lot of confidence in New Energy. We can catch up there. But we're going to have to look at policy, the politics of social mobility and other things where we can attract people with a Republican message of conservatism that works. Or it's impossible to win a baseball game when you only play in 5 innings and the other side plays the full game. And that's the crisis for the party, and the next nomination contest will be very important. I'd quickly finish by saying the biggest threat we have practically, as a practical politician, is having what the Wall Street guys with their cynical humor call a dead cat bounce in 2014. In the off year, the train is a lot better for us. We're going to win some Senate seats, but we're going to win them easy. To win the next presidential, we're going to have to do some hard things, and I'm hoping the success in 2014 doesn't create an echo chamber of wrong thinking. We ignore the huge things we have to do to be successful going forward. I believe we can do them, but they're not going to be easy.
You talked about something, and that brings me to the next thing I wanted to discuss, and that is the idea of modernizing the Republican Party. Let's talk about same-sex marriage, which seems to be a good example of that. And a good example of the party's demographic problem. Let me begin by asking you a question. Just raise your hand. How many of you favor the idea that people should have the right, same-sex couples, to get married? Wow. Okay. So, Bill Kristol, how does the party deal? How does the party deal with the politics of this issue when you see, and overwhelmingly, and it's just what the polls say, young people, although I saw some people, old codgers like me, who at my age also supporting it, but young people overwhelmingly supporting it, how do they open themselves up to that group, but at the same time, they have a huge part of their base, which is social conservatives, evangelicals, the religious right, whatever you want to call it, without alienating them?
Yeah, I'm still reeling from Haley's comment about burning a wet mule. I didn't know you used that expression down there in Yazoo City too. That was a New York term. I can't resist sitting next to Haley. It's like such a fantastic sociological, anthropological experience for me. Well, look, I mean, the answer on the same-sex marriage. How many of you don't now vote Republican and would vote Republican if the Republican candidate were a normal Republican in every other respect, with conservative positions on the gamut of economic and foreign policy issues, but were liberal or for same-sex marriage? Not a whole lot. That's my view. I mean, yes, I think obviously if the polls have moved, people should take the positions they believe in, I think. I think voters will respect politicians more who just make an argument based on principle and don't seem like they're frantically chasing, poll results changing from 58-42 against to 55-45 for, or whatever they really are now. I think the court is likely to end up with a Federalist resolution of same-sex marriage, and I think at that point it goes state by state. The country will settle, I think, into a divided situation for quite a while, and I don't honestly think it's a huge political problem for the Republican Party.
Chris, I mean, one thing, people in politics ought to be for what they're for. Be for what you're for, and don't try to convince people you're for something you're not for. Right. But be tolerant of people that disagree with you. I mean, God Almighty, there are tons of people disagree with me on plenty of stuff. And that's David Axelrod will tell you, there are plenty of people who voted for Barack Obama who disagree with him on a lot of things. And Beth will tell you a lot of people who voted for Mitt Romney disagree with him on a lot of things. But the biggest thing that Republicans don't do is we don't get across to people, we respect the fact that you have a different idea from me. You can be just as good a Republican as I and disagree on whether it's same-sex marriage or abortion or nation building. That's the thing that I think we lacked in this election. People thought we were shrill and snotty to people that disagreed with us when if you are, you're doing the wrong thing. You need to tolerate.
Can I just make one more point?
And I'm going to bring Beth into this in a second.
One more point, just empirically. There were 4 referenda in November on same-sex marriage, and each the anti-same-sex marriage side, if you want to put it simply, ran ahead of Romney in the relevant state. And of course, in North Carolina, the anti-same-sex marriage constitutional amendment, which is a pretty strict one, passed better than 60-40, and Romney won the state by a few points. So it's not, I think if Mitt Romney had problems and the Republicans had problems in 2012, it was much less about their position on this issue, which was a close call in the electorate, and much more about the lack of a modernized economic, upward mobility, health care, et cetera, agenda.
Well, let me just say, because I'll play panelist as well as moderator, I respectfully disagree, and I want to ask Beth about it, because one of the things that I think that the Obama campaign and David Axelrod and his group did so well is to make this a contrast between Obama, who was going to take us forward, who was going to take us forward on gay rights, who was going to take us forward on immigration, who was going to take us forward on women's rights, on abortion, and birth control, and Mitt Romney, who was going to take us back to the 50s. And it was a way of presenting their view of how responsive or resistant the party and the candidates were to social change in this country. How difficult do you think that framing of the election, moving forward versus taking us back, was for the Romney campaign?
Well, I think it was a very difficult frame for us, and I agree with Haley that people should be for what they're for, but I also agree with Mike, who said, talked about that our big problem was message and the issues, and that we needed to look at policies. It was very difficult to talk to young people when the conversation started on gay marriage. If you said you were opposed to gay marriage, we tuned them out. When we talked to Hispanics, and Asian Americans and Indian Americans about immigration. And we gave a very muddled and negative message on that. And they tuned us out. We never got to even talking about the economic issues that I think we shared so much common ground with. And when you got to talking about women, with scare tactics about contraception and abortion, it's tough. Now, I think that some of those issues, people are where they are on those, and there's not going to be any changing. But look, I was at ground zero in Massachusetts with gay marriage. I was in the governor's office when our Supreme Judicial Court mandated that same-sex couples be allowed to marry. It was a really tough time to be a governor. And the court mandated that the legislature, in its wisdom, promulgate laws to make it work. They promulgated 0. So we put it gay marriage into effect from the executive. we were concerned. We didn't, it was a great social experiment. We've had 10 years with that social experiment. I think it's time for Republicans to take an open-minded look. And if they're opposed to it, that's fine. But I think a lot of us have decided that forming families is not the worst thing to have happen.
Ramesh, let me ask you, because you can even see it here. There's quite a fight within the Republican Party. To what degree should it, quote, modernize? To what degree should it stick with its traditional social values? Which raises an issue. Is there a possibility of a split in the party? Because I've heard some conservatives say, if they move this party too far to the center on immigration, on same-sex marriage, on several other issues, that there will be a split third party. Or you could argue the other way, that if the Republican Party stays too traditional, that you could have a group of people that are not Democrats forming their own splinter party, but that you could get a split within the GOP.
Well, I'm not all that concerned about that possibility. I think the core social issue commitment of the Republican Party today is to the right to life of unborn children. I do not see that changing. In fact, I would argue that the party's commitment on that issue has been deepening. It's become more uniformly a pro-life party, as we saw in the last campaign when in the presidential primaries, the candidate who was positioned furthest to the left, John Huntsman, was pro-life, just like all of the other candidates. And I think that some of these other issues end up not being as important in the internal politics of a presidential primary.
It's in the party platform, a constitutional amendment to ban same-sex marriage.
Yeah, sure. Look, I don't think the next Republican presidential nominee is going to be for same-sex marriage. I also don't think the next Republican presidential nominee is going to be for a constitutional amendment to block it. But above all, what I think is that it is a mistake to think of the modernization of the Republican Party exclusively or even primarily in terms of these social issues. I think what is most desperately needed among Republicans is modernization in the sense of having an economic agenda that is geared to the needs of today and not those of 1981. That we have been running on the same program that made great sense at a time when you had runaway inflation and a 70% top marginal tax rate, and healthcare was a much smaller share of the economy. And I think when we think in terms of these demographic categories, yes, we may have some specific problems with Hispanic voters, with young voters, with single women, and maybe some of these things need to be adjusted. But we also need to pay attention to the fact that every one of those groups is more economically insecure than most people. And if you have a message on health care, which is we are going to repeal Obamacare, we are going to take health insurance away from 20, 30 million people, and we're going to replace that and just trust us, we'll come up with something really good. That is not going to be a message that is going to work well with people who are disproportionately having trouble finding jobs with health insurance, paying back student loans, regardless of whether the position on same-sex marriage or the position on immigration is to the liking of everyone in this room.
Before, and I want to get to economic issues in a minute, but I want to ask you, Mike, because it's been so fascinating for me in the last couple of months to watch Rand Paul and the traction that he has gotten in the country, not just with conservatives, not just with Republicans, but with a lot of people. What do you think the political impact of Paul and the libertarian view, which obviously is much more open on drug law enforcement, on same-sex marriage, on a variety of issues?
No, I think the libertarian sub-silo of the Republican Party is growing in both energy and in influence. I think he's going to run for president. I think he's not going to get nominated, but I think he's going to be a big factor. I think the secret message in the kind of the new libertarian 2.0 wing of the party, I learned at the late lamented and deservedly, hopefully not coming back, Iowa straw poll, where I went over to the Rand area to kind of see what they were up to, and I was high, 15 feet in from inhaled smoke. So he's got a certain marketing advantage in one little niche that for small turnout groups, though they tend to drive past a parking lot and get lost, are extremely passionate for that thing. I want to just quickly say something about gay marriage, because 6 years ago I was screaming about the Latino issue. Now I'm screaming about that, so I plan to be wrong again. The problem is it's a metaphor issue, which means it's about tolerance. It's about getting in the door with voters under 35 or even under 40 now to pitch your other stuff. I totally agree with Ramesh about the wider agenda, but we're going to change on it. Why? Because the changing attitude in the country is changing so fast. They're going to drag us screaming, bloody, and beaten toward that position. The question is, how many elections do we want to lose along the way? So I'm not for flipping immediately. I understand the politics of tone, which I totally agree with Haley about, but it's going to happen. So it would be good for our party to start being more in front of the fulcrum point than being dragged at great political cost behind it. The numbers are just too strong among young voters.
All right, let's turn to the economics, and for Republicans, a lot of times it has to do with taxes. And the fact that, as you said, and I think it's interesting, that the economic policy of 1981 doesn't work in 2013. And I think it would be fair to say that the party of low taxes has become the party of protecting the rich. And the thing to me that was quite astonishing was during the fiscal cliff debate in December, when Boehner walked away from the talks with the president and came up with Plan B and said, we're going to extend the Bush tax cuts for 99% of Americans, but we are going to raise them for people making more than $1 million, and he couldn't even get a vote on the floor of the House because he couldn't get it passed. How do you stop being the party that's protecting millionaires' tax breaks? Haley?
Well, let me just say, first of all, I want to go back to Beth and this election. You know, you were making your points after she said it's hard for us to get to talk about some of these issues because the press always wants to talk about same-sex marriage, abortion, blah, 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 blah. Despite that, in the exit polling for this election, by double digits, people thought Mitt Romney would be better for the economy. Mm-hmm. By double digits, people thought Mitt Romney would be better for foreign policy. By double digits, people thought Mitt Romney would be better for just running the country. They have 4 questions in the exit poll. Barack Obama won 1, but he won it by such a huge margin, and it affected so many people's vote. The only one he won by 80 to 18, more or less, cares about people like me. Now, that's what this election turned over. And to twist it around to say it turned over this, that, or the other, yeah, Romney was terrifically hurt because they made him out to be a rich white guy who didn't care about people like him. Here's a guy who's an enormously generous man, would have made a good president, but doesn't make any difference. For the electorate, he was a rich white guy. He was a vulture capitalist. He shipped jobs to China. He took away people's wives' health insurance. He was a quintessential plutocrat married to a known equestrian. Now, that's the difference in the election. Yeah. That's the difference in the election, not whether people agreed or disagreed. We couldn't make the election about the economy. If we would have, Ron would be president.
Could I partly agree and partly disagree with that? Because I do think that question, people who make their primary concern in voting for president cares about people like me. Absolutely. That was the one category Obama excelled. But I just point out a similar question was a huge problem for McCain in 2008. I'd point out also Romney ran ahead of a lot of Republican Senate candidates, almost every Republican Senate candidate who didn't have his personal profile. I think this is not just a Romney's a rich guy problem. It is a party-wide problem of being perceived to exclusively serve the interests of rich people in big business.
And I quickly chime in that if you chart the election, I agree with a lot of what Haley said, but the 2 numbers that really changed, other than the unfavorable rating on the candidate, Mitt Romney, was the perception of the country going the right or wrong direction. Bill Clinton did a real square for the Obama folks, because that convention thing started to really move that number. And Romney's perceived advantage on the economy declined. It was not the same advantage in the beginning. And he was unable to prosecute that in a way that made a difference. And again, I'll say, when you're not operating with a third of the demographics of the country, you have to be Superman in the other demographics, and he was not.
But let's get to my question, which is, how does the party of low taxes, and I think you still think that's a good position politically and substantively to have, how do you avoid this sense that you're protecting the rich folks and you're concerned about rich folks more than you are the middle class?
Well,
Bill?
Well, you have a pro-middle class economic policy, which involves a pro-family tax policy. It involves, if Mitt Romney is paying 14% tax return personally, which is totally illegal and inappropriate, when he defends it, he shouldn't simply say, I did what my accountants told me to do. He should say, I want to change this tax code so that people like me do actually pay a more reasonable tax. I don't pay a lower marginal tax rate, a lower overall tax rate than people making $80,000 or $140,000 a year. That was a very damaging moment in the campaign. I do think, I know all the sophisticated types said, oh, tax returns, that's just, silly issue, but I don't buy that for a minute. And the 47% was a very damaging moment, and they both showed a lack of a concern for helping people move up the ladder. So I think that economic mobility, social mobility, what Ramesh said about healthcare, I totally agree. On the banks, I mean, the Republicans were against, I think correctly as a matter of policy, Dodd-Frank. It embodies too big to fail. It's crony capitalism. But neither the Republican House, and the Republicans controlled the House in 2011, 2012, nor the Romney campaign could resolve all the disputes among Republicans to say, here's our financial reform proposal, which allowed Bill Clinton and Barack Obama and everyone else to say, they just want to take you back to 2000, to the last Republican administration. And remember what happened on that? There was a huge financial collapse. What's their proposal to fix the system? You need a forward-looking reform agenda which is focused on the middle class and on Main Street, not Wall Street. And it means taking on the donor class of the Republican Party, the donors, who are much more powerful than when we all got into politics. I mean, in this respect, I think there has been a structural change which has been damaging to the Republican Party. And they do not want, I mean, I'm saying, the Republicans at least have said the carried interest exemption, which no one really believes is good economic policy, which helps hedge fund guys avoid, let them basically declare ordinary income as capital gains. We're against that. We want tax reform that will let people pay, even the playing field and help the middle class. But Republicans have been not just Mitt Romney, I agree with Ramesh on this, Republicans across the board have somehow decided they can't be for a more pro-middle class, middle America tax policy and general economic policy.
Beth, I mean, you were there, so I don't want to just be looking backwards at what went wrong in the campaign, but do give us a sense of the struggle that you had. Obviously, Romney was what Romney was, and it was no surprise. Teddy Kennedy did it in 1994, so they're going to go after bank capital and stuff. You had the tax return issue and things like that. How big a problem was it? Could you have handled it better? And more importantly, looking forward, how does this party say to that 81%, no, we care about you too, and in fact, we got a better solution than the other guys?
Well, without rehashing it all, I think people have talked about what went wrong. I mean, we clearly, Mitt was, the 47% comment played into everything that had gone beforehand, so artfully put forward by the Obama campaign in the spring and summer, and it just sort of, I could almost see collective heads going, aha, and that was preceded, I think it was preceded or succeeded immediately by the tax issue. So there's sort of like a 1-2 punch that just reinforced. So it was a tough thing. I still think we could have overcome it, but one thing I think we failed to do, and that is put out the message of the growth of the Republican Party being about growth and opportunity. And we should have, when you say our tax policies benefited the rich, somehow, I don't believe that. I believe that the Republican tax policy benefits the middle class enormously and the striving class. But we did not get the message out there that the Republican Party wanted to be the ladder up party. We wanted to be the party that helped working, lower income families become working, more thriving middle class families, and middle class family being upper middle class families, and that our economic policies would do that. That message just got lost in the clamor of a lot of the social issues and the tax issues, being portrayed as for the wealthy. Helping the wealthy.
When I interviewed...
we could have done a better job in framing that message.
When I interviewed Romney about a month ago, his first interview since the election, we were talking about Hispanics, and he said that he believed that he was hurt more by Obamacare and his desire to repeal Obamacare among Hispanics who really wanted an expanded health care than by his comments on self-deportation. Do you believe that to be the case?
I think neither were helpful. I think the Obamacare in the Hispanic community really was a very potent issue. Self-deportation was also a problem, though. I'm not sure I would parse which one was more potent.
Go ahead.
No, I think, look, from the outside, I didn't work on the campaign. I do know Mitt well. I ran his campaign for governor. I think one of the biggest problems that almost any national Republican candidate had then and will have in the future is navigating the short-term incentives of winning a Republican primary. Because there is, as the parties redress into red and blue states that get redder and bluer, there becomes an equation of, in too much Republican think. I mean, I think we've run two horribly strategically off presidential campaigns in the last 8 years, but part of it is you have to survive a Republican primary, where a lot of the mindset is the general election is just a bigger version of the Republican primary. So I think the Romney campaign found itself doing a lot of things to survive the primary that really put him in a tough situation in a general election, which is a very different place. And until we change some of those incentives, until we have a middle-class economic agenda, because Republicans win. I made my career doing governors in blue states. Here's how we win. It's real simple. We're not crazy, and we're the better choice for the middle class. Generally, that's how we do it. And until we get that formula back and are willing to take a lot of pain in primaries in order to put that into an uncomfortable place in order to have nominatable candidates, we're not only going to have the problems Romney have, we're going to have more people on television saying, I'm not a witch, or, you know, geometries or a communist plot, and it's just self-defeating. So, I mean, the party's awake to this, and there's a lot of stuff going on to try to deal with it, but that's the problem. Our incentives are screwed up.
Well, go ahead.
There's an opportunity here, I think, though, that is similar to the one that the Democrats had in the early 1990s. Because if you think about what Bill Clinton did, sort of the great departures from what was seen as liberal orthodoxy in 1992, being for the death penalty, for ending welfare, ending welfare as we know it, and you know, saying maybe we shouldn't say it's a nice thing for black people to kill white people. None of those things were unpopular among rank-and-file Democratic voters. There were some loud, influential voices that did not like them or didn't like the overtones of what was being said. And on the economic agenda, I think there's something very similar going on in that, say, if we were to have an agenda of expanding the child tax credit, that would be enormously controversial with the Wall Street Journal editorial page. But actual Republican primary voters, I don't think would be against that. I think they'd be very much in favor of it, and more so than for another reduction in the capital gains tax.
Let me just make a point. I sympathize with what Beth was saying because so much of it is true. I got involved in Republican politics in 1968. And from the day I got involved until now, the Democrats have had the bumper sticker and the Republicans have had the essay. I mean, Ronald Reagan had to prove he wasn't for the rich. I mean, the Republicans have been from the rich since Calvin Coolidge. And I mean that literally. That's always the attack. And we're going to do away with Social Security, and we're going to do away with Medicare. And that's always, it is always incumbent on us to tell our story, to get our narrative out. And it's not easy, and it never will be easy, because we have to explain why Lincoln was right when he said he couldn't understand people that loved employees but hated employers. Now, the fact of the matter is, if your employer pays lower taxes, then you got a chance to get higher pay or better benefits or better equipment so that your company can stay competitive in this global marketplace that we've got. Reagan wasn't the first Republican that helped the average guy identify with the business class. Dwight Eisenhower did that. And that's what we've got to do, is we've got to show people something that they actually know inherently is right. I saw a bunch of heads nod when I said, hate employers, and love employees. People know to have employees, you got to have employers, and they've got to have the wherewithal to stay in business. Otherwise, we're all going to be working for the government, except there's not going to be anybody to pay the cost of the government. Now, that's where you ultimately end up if you don't rebuild and have growth and opportunity, as Beth said, because that growth and opportunity is in the private sector, not bigger government. Bigger government means a smaller private economy.
But let me just add one word, if I could just leave aside the 47%, which was obviously very bad luck or very skillful, I don't know, acquisition of, video by the Obama campaign or by networks. I mean, I saw that was the thing 1,000 times living in Northern Virginia in a swing state. I'm there, I'm trying to watch the Nationals game, exciting stretch run, and every half inning it's, oh my God, the 47% video. And one reason that hurt so badly, though, it was a talk to donors. So it was a very wealthy guy speaking to his fellow very wealtly guy as the waiters cleared the table, and it's those 47% that just depended on government, which includes everyone on Medicare, everyone in the military, et cetera. And I think that's a huge damage. We'll leave aside the 47% blunder. Mitt Romney spoke eloquently and I think convincingly about entrepreneurs. That was one of his major themes. And I was always struck, though, that he'd go on about, he'd cite entrepreneurs he'd met, he'd try to explain, as Haley has, that you need them to succeed if you just succeed. But he showed so much more empathy or sympathy or understanding of the challenges facing entrepreneurs, the obstacles in the way of small business. And he didn't speak much about people who don't wake up every morning thinking, hey, I could start a small business. People who go to work, try to do a good job, earn a salary in the private sector or the public sector, hope to bring up their kids, volunteer in the community, et cetera. And hope to have their kids have more of a chance than they did. And the Republicans need to have that message. It can't all be, there's been too much talk, honestly, among Republicans and conservatives, I would say, about the glories of entrepreneurship and not enough about the virtues of solid middle-class, hardworking people who, because of disposition or lack of talent, lack of a certain entrepreneurial spirit, don't get up every morning thinking, if only those stupid government regulations were in the way, I could start myself, I could become the next Mitt Romney.
All right, I want to, because I know that you guys want to play a little 2016 Republican politics. We're all crazy and we all like to do it. And particularly for the younger folks in here, I want to pick up on something that Ramesh said, that this is so similar to the situation in the late 80s, early 90s after Ronald Reagan for 8 years and then George H.W. Bush. And the Democrats were then dismissed as the party of Mondale and Dukakis and out of touch and too liberal and geographically challenged, that they only really had access to the Northeast and the upper Midwest and the Northwest and maybe California. And then Bill Clinton came on the scene and the Democratic Leadership Council, and he began to move things to the center. And Ramesh talked about some of the positions that he took and that made people take a different second look at the at the Democratic Party. And so I'd like to just go down the line here and assess the field for 2016. Rubio, Ryan, Chris Christie, Jeb Bush, Jindal, you can add other names if you want to. Is there a figure in that group who can play Bill Clinton, who can take the party, we've discussed the problems at considerable length, and can move it more into a position that's going to attract voters, and to use Haley's threshold, we care about people like you?
Unknown, desperately needed, but I think the fulcrum point is, are we going to find our Clinton who's more creative, or are we going to be the Democrats after Humphrey in '68 and decide we need a real Democrat and find our McGovern? And so it aligns that way, and I don't know which way it'll go. I think our McGovern, if I had to bet right now, recklessness, somebody who's not even mentioned run, watch Ted Cruz. He is a home run hitter in Republican movement conservative primary kind of environment, if that's where it goes. On the other side.
And he would be the McGovern?
Yes, absolutely. We would reset the clock to 0, which might be what we need. I hope not. Very painful price. And there are others too, but I think he has a certain powerful skill if that is the way the party decides to react to all this. On the other hand, if you look for more creative candidates, Rubio's very impressive. There are people who think a lot of Chris Christie. Everybody's problematical in their own way. My old client, Jeb Bush, I think would be a terrific candidate should he decide to run, which I think is probably less likely than more likely, but undecided at this point. So there are some, probably come from the governors. I'm encouraging Haley to run myself, but it's too murky now. We just know it's going to go one of those two paths, and I sure hope it's the more Clintonian, accretive path.
Ramesh.
Speaking of Chris Christie, I don't know if I'd want him to be president. Sometimes he seems a little impulsive for my taste as a commander-in-chief. I couldn't help notice when, there's this big conservative conference in Washington which didn't invite him to speak because he's not a conservative all-star. And it just struck me, look, this is the governor of a state that last went for Republican senator in 1972, last went for Republican presidential candidate in 1988. has 84% approval rating, is pro-life and against same-sex marriage, and a foe of public sector unions there. And we're saying, not good enough. It's not just that we don't want you to lead us, we don't even want to hear from you. And so I guess before I would ask about the leadership, I'd want to know what the mindset of the Republican Party activists in the winter of 2015, 2016 is. If their mindset is, conservatism is too good for these people being the country, then we're going to lose. That's not a winning slogan.
Exactly.
But let me I'm really not asking you about where you think the party is going to go. I'm asking you your assessment of these people. Is Christie the one who you think could be the Clinton of 2016?
I guess I am maybe a little less inclined to think in terms of the leadership potential of these individual candidates and more about the mood of the entire party. But look, I think Christie's has shown some good signs. I think Jindal has. I think Paul Ryan has. Rubio has, and we need to see them all perform. I mean, and I myself am probably not going to be a Rand Paul guy. Some of the things that are distinctive about his brand of republicanism I don't particularly like, but I would like to see him run. I'd like to see him test how big a market is there for these kinds of views, and maybe he can sharpen some of these other guys.
Beth?
Yeah, I'm really optimistic about the crop of Republicans, although I share Mike's concern that we could go woefully off track and nominate someone who's unelectable. But I vetted a lot of these people for the VP position, and I was, I ended that process a very happy woman because I was able to hand Mitt Romney a stack of folders and say, here's a really good group of candidates, and we never felt that we were, we had a shortage of highly qualified folks sitting on the bench. But beyond that, I think a lot of them are doing really interesting things. The fact that Marco Rubio is taking a leadership role in immigration, well, that's showing political leadership and political courage. The fact that Chris Christie continues to run 72% in the brightest blue state means he's, his courage in taking on the status quo in his state resonates among everybody. Paul Ryan sticking to his budget guns. Rand Paul consistently out there telling his story. And so I just feel very optimistic, and I think there's a team of leaders who, even if the mood of the country is of the conservative movement is in one direction, I think we will have a bench that will lead them in a good direction. So I'm leaning towards the very positive.
I should tell you before I ask Brother Kristol, who is one of the panelists on Fox News Sunday, and well, you knew that he wasn't a great Romney fan, Beth, so I'm not going to tell the tale out of school.
Oh, you're kidding.
Yeah, I had a button, and I forget, was it Rubio Ryan or Ryan Rubio, but he gave me a campaign button in 2011. So he was very much on their bandwagon very early on. So who's the guy to lead the Republican Party out of the wilderness?
I was happy when Governor Romney picked Paul Ryan, and I think he ended up certainly not hurting the ticket, maybe helping it a little bit, and showing that you could actually say something truthful about entitlement reform, and that did not end up, whatever else cost Romney the election. I don't think a lot of people think Medicare reform was damaging, and in fact, Romney did better than any Republicans ever done among seniors. So, look, everyone's got the Clinton analogy in mind. I have it too. I was in the first Bush White House. We got clobbered by Clinton. But there's also an Obama analogy. I mean, President Bush was reelected with 51% of the vote, controlled both houses of Congress, increased the seats in both houses, and the Democrats were supposed to they had to go back to Clinton, and they had to do this, and they had to do that. And a very bright, young, attractive politician came along, defeated the alleged, inevitable nominee, Hillary Clinton, and then won the election in 2008. So I'm a little less concerned about going to the center, going to the right, and more concerned about the generational change, which I think is important at this point. And in that respect, Rubio, Walker, Ryan, Christie are all very good. I think the Republicans, if I'm not mistaken, have had the older nominee in every election from 92 on. No, I'm sorry, the older nominee has lost every election from 92 on, actually. And I don't think, Dolan, McCain, Romney, it just doesn't sound like, gee, that's the party of the future. They're both all admirable men. I think would all have been better presidents than the people they lost to. It's just, in this day and age, I do think the younger senators, governors, congressmen are more likely to be victorious in 2016.
Governor?
You know, if we'd been sitting here in April 2005, and I had predicted that this brand new senator from Illinois was going to beat Hillary Clinton for the Democrat nomination in 2008, everybody would have fallen out on the floor, said, "Don't bring that redneck back anymore." He don't know what day it is. Anybody that tries to predict who's going to be nominated for president, or even who's going to run for president in 2016 is playing a fool's game. Now, since it's the news media, Chris, you know, the truth is we're probably going to have a generation shift. Except for Jeb, who's, if his last name was Brown instead of Bush, he would probably be the favorite for the nomination. But except for him, everybody else is in a new generation. Christie, Scott Walker, Paul Ryan, Marco Rubio. But then there is a whole new generation of governors. Bobby Jindal, Nikki Haley, Susana Martinez, Brian Sandoval. If Matt Mead was the governor of Wisconsin instead of Wyoming, he would be very much in the forefront of running for president. Bill Haslam in Tennessee, people that nobody here ever heard of. Just like I had never heard of Barack Obama in the spring of 2005. I think it will likely be a generational shift. Rand Paul would be a generational shift. But I do think Ramesh talks about the most important issue, picking it up from Mike. Are we going to make the mistake that we made after 1960 and said we got to go for purity? And the Democrats made that mistake a couple of times. And we just have to avoid that because you know, we're the conservative party of the United States and the Democrats are the liberal party. But in a two-party system, both parties necessarily are coalitions. The Democrats got people who are more conservative than some Republicans, and the Republicans got some people who are more liberal than some Democrats. But we have to understand 20 million pro-choice voters voted for Mitt Romney, and 20 million pro-life voters voted for Barack Obama. And the same thing is true about same-sex marriage and a whole bunch of other things. So what we can't afford is for it to be an election where we try to nominate the purest candidate because, you know, there hadn't ever been but one perfect person ever walked on this earth. He ain't going to run in 2016. I can give you that inside information.
All right, we're going to open it up to you, but I want to ask one last question before we get your very good questions, and that is the subject here was what's next for the Republican Party. So I want you to tell me what's the single most important step. We'll go down the line, starting with you, Mike. The single most important step that the GOP can take between now and 2016 to get back in the winning way, and whatever has been said before you cannot say. So and
I have a horrible advantage. I'm going to do the obvious one if I have to pick one, which is pass comprehensive immigration reform, and soon.
Okay.
Modernize the economic agenda. See? Succinct.
There you go.
Become a party that is open to new ideas and not just the way we did it before.
Nominate a good candidate.
Remember, the most important election is the 2014 election, not the 2016 election.
Because?
Because it'll color the shape of 2016 more than anything else we're talking about here.
And we've got one other good thing for the Republican Party, and that is that David Axelrod won't be part of the campaign in 2016. He'll be here. So, why don't we open this up? We have a microphone here. Please get up and, oh my gosh. Okay, now try to keep your questions. I'm going to pull my my Axelrod thing here. Try to keep your questions relatively brief. If you want to direct it to a specific person, go ahead. Go ahead.
Physics PhD student.
Hi, thank you. I'd like to ask about crafting a modern Republican message. On one hand, the Republican Party has not been so fortunate in the past few presidential elections. On the other hand, it has been doing pretty well in the congressional races, and partly due to gerrymandering, the current, well, if you just look at the congressional map or whatever, the current GOP message might still be working very well with a lot of the congressional districts. So on one hand, with the current congressional map, how hard it is to craft and deliver a national modern GOP message. On the other hand, just as Governor Barbour mentioned, the demographic shift in Mississippi over his lifetime, how reliable is the current congressional map with the current demographic shifts? Thank you.
We haven't had as much demographic change in Mississippi as a lot of states. We have about 3% Asian population, but we have the largest black population in the country, 37%. So that state will become more competitive. I think the better way to look at your question is don't talk about House races, talk about governorships. They are in no way gerrymandered at all. You know, they're set by the state boundaries. And we have 30 governors, most of whom got elected on almost an exclusive economic message. The message in Virginia, Bob's for jobs. And when the Virginia Democrats are starting talking about an abortion paper he wrote when he was in college, his answer was Bob's for jobs. And won by 18 points, even though he was behind in June. Ohio, Wisconsin, you go through the map. Michigan, Pennsylvania, the places we lost that were critical in 12, we won in 10, almost, I don't want to say exclusively, but overwhelmingly with an economic message. And those guys have produced.
Could I jump in?
No, I'd like to get more questions. Let me just say one thing to you, which is, and I don't know how widely this is known. Yes, the Republicans held the House, but because of the gerrymandering that you cited, in fact, it was 2 million more people voted for Democratic candidates in 2012 than for Republican candidates. So it was, yes, they won the House, but it was not a great mandate for the Republicans. Sir.
2 quick questions. One, in listening to all of the discussion about the changes in demographics, I heard nothing mentioned about the African-American vote. And it sounds as if it's been written off by the Republican Party as, what was the Speaker of the House, Tip O'Neill once said, you know, you've got to ask people for their vote. I don't even hear anybody asking for the African-American vote from the Republican Party. Everybody else, but now all of a sudden the African-American vote is irrelevant. Secondly, to go to economics, I firmly agree with you that the Republican Party needs to be more aggressive about promoting middle-class prosperity, and I don't understand why this war on success that the Democrats have been allowed to paint the Republicans into that corner as if they don't care about the middle class. As you rightly say, you need employers to have employees. Success has, for some reason, been demonized now and become a derogatory term. And just real quickly, I saw in the news today that the White House is going to propose a cap on IRAs. Now, to me, that's one step removed from what happened in Cyprus.
Why don't anybody except Haley, because you answered the last one, want to talk about the African Americans and the appeal?
Do you mind, since I have the, I mean,
this is what it's like to be the host of a Sunday talk show. As I mentioned to the
nice lady's question, it happens that my state has the highest African American population in the country. And it is the toughest demographic group for Republicans and has been for at least 2 generations. But in my state, when I ran for re-election, I got 24% of the black vote, where the presidential campaign, they got 3. And the difference is we tried. After Katrina, the African American population of the state knew that they'd been treated the same way as the white people. And they had gotten the same programs, the same opportunities, the same treatment. And so I mean, that is the high watermark for a Republican. But when you do the math, when you got 37% of the population and you get a fourth, the Democrats' chances of winning just go out the window. And I am very pleased that a lot of those voters are not Republicans today, but they're very open that they were for me, and they're willing to listen to some other Republicans, but we do have to try harder. Now,
Okay, sir.
you want to answer any other question?
Oh,
okay.
no.
Shut
Let's
up.
keep going.
I'll shut up.
No,
You're right about the IRA thing.
Hi, my name is Greg Vogel, and I actually just want to ask for some advice from all of you. I recently came back from London. I did a political internship with the British Parliament, and my project was on political communications, on how to shape voter perception of a candidate's personality, as well as controversial issues, using his rhetoric as well as his personality for like a presidential debate. And while I was there, I found that this was very similar to what I did when I did the collegiate debate team in my college. And not only was it my passion, I realized was something I want to make my long-term ambition, in which I would love to work on the presidential debates for the Republican Party, the right side, in the future. And I've done a little bit of work with the Foreign Service, and I realized this would take far too long for me to do in government work directly. I think politics is where my heart and my mind is at. What would you recommend for my next steps to be? And do I need to do some type of master's program in order to eventually be able to be hired by people such as yourselves?
Mike, this sounds like right up your alley.
No. No more academia. Go out and work on a campaign. Get slapped around a little bit. Learn about how political communication works. And it's an open business. If you got skill and hustle, you can move up in political consulting. But, there are winners and losers. So go get real world experience. Stay out of Washington.
Okay.
And sometimes even if you don't have skill and hustle.
Yeah, plenty of that, too.
Pick a candidate early and work your tail off.
Yeah.
Next gentleman.
Hi, my name's Adam. Thanks for coming. Just to put it out there, I'm a veteran of the Iraq War.
Thank you.
And I also, no need to clap. And I've also just graduated from the University of Chicago. My question is, it appears that looking at the issue of the Republican Party, none of you seem to have mentioned the issue of what many Republicans appear to be proponents of big government. And I'm just going to try and read off this to make it short. When it fits their needs. For example, willing to go to war, the use of drones, etc., when it is not in our own national interest, even though some of you I know, for example, Bill Kristol, seem to have their own perspective on what is our national interest and what is not, where some in the Republican Party may disagree. Second, it appears that the Republican Party, and many of you have not mentioned this, you're unwilling to open up to members within the Republican Party, again, Bill Kristol, and Republican Party constituents.
Bill, I think you're going to be answering this question.
Yes, please. Progressive, modernizing views that some of the constituents as well as members in the Republican Party that are open to. So I would open up that to any of you, because none of you seem to have mentioned the war issue, the issue of drones, which in some essence it's very interesting that you actually fall in line with what the Obama administration is doing right now with drones. So there is no difference. So how do you differentiate yourself?
Bill.
I pretty much support the Obama administration and its use of drones, so I don't differentiate myself for the sake of differentiating myself. I don't really have the ability to close down the Republican Party to alternate voices. I believe I haven't supported a winning Republican presidential candidate in 20 years or something. I preferred McCain to Bush in 2000. I can't remember who I preferred in 2008. I think I preferred Fred Thompson originally in 2008, and he didn't turn out to quite have the energy to run. So 2012, as Chris said, I wanted Mitch Daniels to run. I wanted Paul Ryan to run. I wanted Chris Christie to run, and none of them ran. So I'm very much for open debate. And I would say this, I think a healthy party that's when it loses a couple of elections, when it rejuvenates itself, the historians write back, Clinton took the party to the center, it was very elegantly done. It's chaos while it's happening. And people are sitting around being unhappy with each other and fighting pretty vigorously. And in that respect, I am very much I'm much happier with the vigorous debates that are going on within the party now, and the vigorous sort of self-examination than if everyone were just saying, we don't want to talk about all this, shove it under the rug, and let's just hope it turns out better next time. So I actually think the Republican Party and the conservative movement, actually, the internal debate is healthy, and I think that's healthy on foreign policy, too. I haven't changed my mind about foreign policy, but if other people change their minds, they should make their case.
Let me just say to the soldiers, hey, thank you for your service. Secondly, my views on foreign policy are enough different from Bill Kristol that a couple of years ago he attacked me in a column for
not that Haley remembers that or anything.
It actually was a very important thing for my family because my older son, who doesn't care anything about politics, wrote him a nasty letter. It really brought us all together. But I do have very different views about nation building. I am a product of the Reagan White House, and I think we have to be very careful about how we use the military. The military is trained to be a bunch of warriors. They are not trained to build sewer systems. And my own view is we're not going to make Afghanistan into India or Italy or Ireland. And the idea that we are closes your eyes on 3,000 years of history. Now, I only make that point because Bill and I seriously disagree. But, you know, we could both be good Republicans and disagree. Hell, that's not all we disagree on, I'm sure. But don't be discouraged because there are millions of Republicans that think like you think, that are very pro-military, that believe in peace through strength, but don't believe we have to be the policeman of the world.
Sir. Hi, thank you all for coming. My name is Benjamin Field, and I'm a third year at the college. I'm also the executive director of the University of Chicago Democrats, so of course I don't have a vested interest at all, but there was a little bit of speculation about who would be the best Republican 2016 candidate for president. So I just wanted to ask you all, who would you each be most scared of? What Democrat would you each be most scared of going up against in 2016?
Whoever beats Hillary. I've learned that lesson once.
Go ahead.
Sure. Earlier we were talking about the cares like me question, particularly when it comes to tax policy. And I was surprised to hear talk of taking on the donor class. I don't think anybody in this room expects that to get any easier going forward with what's happening in campaign finance. What are some realistic avenues towards taking on the donor class and making future Republican candidates seem more like me?
Look, I mean, there are a lot of votes. Ramesh has made this point about the Republican primary electorate. Mike Huckabee got an awful lot of votes in 2007, 2008. I think he was a little flawed as a candidate. I mean, limited as a candidate, perhaps, coming out of nowhere. I think if he had run again in 2012, he could well have been the nominee. There is a campaign to be run. I'm not sure I would agree with that campaign, incidentally, on every issue, because I think it could go in a slightly demagogic and Buchananite, et cetera, direction. But there is a campaign to be run in the Republican Party that is not an orthodox, sort of top-down Wall Street Journal economics campaign. It says, I'm not sure that would be good for policy. I've got to think someone will pick that up next time because politicians are entrepreneurs and there's a big market out there for sort of Huckabee, Perot, Buchanan, however one will want to call that complex of issues, especially I think on the kind of more economic populist issue, especially if we have another slowdown or the banks keep having record profits and President, the way to run against Obama is that he's been much too nice to Wall Street, not that he's too harsh on Wall Street, right?
I just quickly tag that with, you got to be careful when you lump the donor class together because it's a big, complicated universe of a lot of different kind of donors. But our problem
Mike's worried that this is on C-SPAN and some donors.
No.
I want to stipulate that some of my best friends are donors and they're loyal and patriotic Americans. The donors to the Institute of Politics at the University of Chicago, excellent people.
Bill and I have been friends for 20 years, and I've enjoyed the Washington Post clips on his donors and his organizations. We're all part of it. But my point would be, both parties have a problem with the donor class. You ask any governor, you ask Rahm Emanuel about reforming public education. So it is a question for the new politics, because you look at the one thing that's growing is total voter cynicism with the politics we give them. And the donor special interest class stuff works everywhere, and it's a big problem. The question is, will people start to really vote against it rather than just complain about it?
Okay. Let's have the next person.
Let me just make one point.
No. Go ahead.
Wall Street gives more money to the Democrats.
See, this is the problem with the Republican Party. You're trying to hurt the rights of women.
That's
the problem with the liberal media.
Young lady, go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you. First of all, thank you so much for coming to speak here, and I'll keep this quick, I promise. So I'm a graduate student here at the University of Chicago in neuroscience. So I'm interested in science, and particularly diseases of aging. In the next 30 years, the population over the age of 65 is going to increase dramatically, and so the proportion of people in this country with diseases of aging will increase, and yet there are virtually no effective therapies or cures yet. So my question is to you, what do you envision the Republican Party will do in the future to encourage the growth of science in the United States, especially funding for basic research into things like cures for Alzheimer's disease and cancer and that type of thing?
Ramesh?
You talk about Alzheimer's and you immediately think of me? Aging?
If the shoe fits.
Science? I think maybe there's a little profiling going on. I think that, well, look, I mean, those diseases of aging are going to become an increasingly severe problem for Republicans in particular, according to all the demographic projections I've seen. I think that the party could use a little bit more, a small dose more maybe of Gingrichiism and, you know, that kind of interest in the cutting edge of science that a lot of Republicans haven't had. I think there has been a healthy interest on the part of Republicans in things like the STEM Act and the Staples Act for addressing the immigration side of our problems with science and engineering and technology and whatever the M stands for. But you know, right now, I think that I am one of those who believes that we absolutely have to address our long-term overspending problem. But I do think the Republicans have tended to think of that as the entirety of the economic agenda, and there have to be other things. And I would think that a reasonable level of funding for basic research, you know, the pure public good type of scientific research has to be part of that.
Let me just add one thing to this, because it's a matter of deep personal concern to me. My dad, Mike Wallace, died a year ago yesterday, and he suffered from dementia in the last years of his life. And this is an example of where the Republican Party is so wrong, because last week Obama announced a new program to map the brain, and the immediate response I heard from Republicans was, well, you know, maybe, but, you know, should we be spending government money? And if we do, then we got to take it out of other research. I mean, Gingrich is exactly right on this. This is going to be the huge ticking economic time bomb of this society. The fact that people of my age are going to get older and are going to be perfectly healthy physically and are going to be mentally impaired and able to live into their 80s and 90s, and we have no system set up to care for those people. And the sooner we begin to address that problem, I think it's one of the most serious fiscal as well as physical and health problems that the country faces. It's a huge issue. 2 more questions.
The unelected Grover Norquist seems to have had a huge influence on the U.S. Congress. I am very troubled by this. I wonder if you are, and how he could be marginalized, or would you like to see him marginalized?
Seth? I only say that because you haven't spoken. I'm not typecasting you.
Look, Grover has played an important role in Washington, and I think that as a watchdog and a guy who brought conservatives together, there was a valid role for him. My personal opinion is that his pledge kind of took things a little too far and limited alternatives, limited options. And when people started interpreting things as tax increases that perhaps were not, it wasn't productive for the Republican Party. But again, everybody has a role to play, and even though he was unelected, he did play. He plays an important role in our party. But I'm not a big fan of this pledge personally.
And finally, our host.
Yes, mine is not a question. Thank you, Charlie. Whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, a liberal or a conservative, I think we can all agree this has been a wildly entertaining panel. So I want to thank you. As the director of the Institute of Politics, I'm deeply grateful for that. And as a Democrat, I'm glad that you haven't yet figured the whole thing out. So but you probably will at some point. The other thing that we can agree on is that the NCAA game tips off at 8:23, and therefore I think we're going to call this to adjournment. But once again, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and your time with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.